Just a quick note beforehand, I'm building a router using an old PC and running pfSense on it. I'm doing this with a single network interface connection on this PC. Though I'm doing this to replace my Starlink router, this router can be used for NBN fibre connections as well as other connections. You may need a modem that's capable of bridge mode if you're using this for any other type of connection. So, if you're looking to build your own router using a PC with a single network interface card, keep watching. After 9 months of waiting, I recently received my Starlink kit, allowing me to finally join the 21st century and get an internet connection greater than 5 megabit ADSL. If you've watched my last video, the one thing you may have noticed is the lack of any configuration options for the router that Starlink provides. Welcome to Procrasturbate Tech. Today I'll be showing you how to make your own router using an old PC and pfSense, using a single network interface card. I'm going to be installing and using pfSense on a not entirely old mini PC that I found thrown out in the trash. It's a HP EliteDesk 800 series, I think a generation 2. It has an Intel Core i5 CPU running at 2.5 GHz, 8GB of DDR4 RAM, and some sort of spinning rust for storage. It has a single gigabit Ethernet port on the back. Because of this, we need to be able to differentiate the internet side from the internal network side. We can do this by using VLANs. To do this, we will need a network switch that supports tagged and untagged VLAN configuration. Most managed switches will have this capability, but for this I'll be using a Netgear GS308E. It is a cheap enough 8-port gigabit smart switch that supports VLANs and will work perfectly fine for this project. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to clean up this old PC and swap that spinning rust for a solid state drive. I'm just using this cheap Crucial BX500 SSD that I picked up for cheap on Amazon. This should be more than fast enough and more than enough capacity. The PC looks clean enough inside, so there's not much to do here. Unplug the SATA cable, remove the hard drive from the little mounting bracket. There's some mounting screws to remove from the hard drive, so let's do that. Place them on the new SSD, slot in the new SSD and plug in the SATA cable, and that's it for hardware upgrades. Now we need the installer for pfSense and we need to put it onto a USB drive. Download pfSense Community Edition from their website. I'll put a link in the description to where you can get it from. Once it's downloaded, you'll need to image it onto a USB flash drive. I'm going to use Rufus to do this and use all the default options. Once that's done, you'll want to get your network switch ready with the appropriate VLANs. The way you'll do this will depend on the type of network switch that you purchased or that you're using. I'm going to show you how to do it with this Netgear GS308E switch. For those using other switch models, you'll need the following configuration at a minimum. The VLAN IDs and the ports that you use aren't important, but I've listed what I am using. You need 2 VLANs. The first VLAN will be for your WAN side. I'm using ID 100. The second VLAN will be for your LAN side. I'm using VLAN ID 901. I'll be using port 1 as my WAN port, so that's where Dishy will be connected to. I'll be using port 2 for my router, and I'll be using port 3 and upwards for my LAN side. If you're unfamiliar with VLANs, what this is doing in its most basic terms is allowing the router to receive WAN and LAN traffic through a single port, and stopping any LAN traffic from directly talking to the WAN port without the router being involved. A more simplified way you could put this is that, well, the switch is acting like an extension of the router, giving you all the ports that you'd normally find on a consumer router and feeding them back through a single cable. Now on to configuring the Netgear GS308E. I'm plugging this directly into my computer without a router present at the moment, so I'll need to manually configure an IP address. This switch has its default password and IP on the bottom. Open up the IP address in a web browser. You'll be prompted to change the password at the very least. Then I'm going to change the name of the switch. At this stage, I won't be changing the IP address. Once that's done, you'll need to configure the VLAN options. We want to configure 802.1q using advanced configuration. Click on the VLAN configuration and create 2 VLAN IDs. You can use the default VLAN of 1 as one of your VLANs, but I'm not going to do this. Go to VLAN membership, then select the VLAN ID you're using for the WAN from the VLAN ID drop-down and ensure that the port you're using for your WAN, Starlink Dishy, is untagged. For the router, you want it tagged. I'm using port 1 for Starlink Dishy and port 2 for the router. The rest of the ports should not be mapped. Hit apply. Select the VLAN ID for your LAN and set your router port as tagged, and select at least one other port as untagged so you can connect your network devices to it. I'm setting ports 3 to 8 as LAN ports so I can use these ports for my devices on my network. Hit apply. Go to port PVID, Then select your router port and all ports that you're going to be using on your LAN. Change the PVID to your LAN's VLAN and then hit apply. Then select only port 1 and change the PVID to your WAN's VLAN and click apply. Lastly, if you didn't use the default configured VLAN of 1, make sure you go back to VLAN membership and remove it from all ports. Once you have done this, I suggest changing the IP address of the switch to something within the range of the pfSense router. The pfSense router by default assigns itself an IP address of 192.168.1.1 and uses the subnet of 255.255.255.0. Once that's done, you can put aside the switch and you can connect the PC that you're going to be using as your router. I'm going to power on the PC and open up the BIOS options. If your PC supports it, you want to change the configuration to turn on the PC after mains power is restored. Different manufacturers might call this something different, but effectively what we want is the computer to start back up and boot if the power fails, just like a normal router would. This is optional though. Next, connect your USB drive with the pfSense installer to your computer and boot the PC from the USB stick. After the computer is booted from the USB stick, the installer will start automatically. Select Install, choose your keyboard mapping unless you're already using a US keyboard layout, then continue through the prompts. You can go for all default options in the installer here if you like, but I'm choosing Auto UFS UEFI since the computer uses UEFI and I'm not quite ready to trust ZFS. Continue through all of the prompts. Then the installation will continue to run. Once the installation completes, you'll need to reboot the system. Remove your USB stick and allow the system to reboot. Once booted, it will ask you if you want to configure VLANs. Yep, we want to do that. Since this machine only has one network interface, the only interface shown is EM0. This might vary depending on your machine. I'll be selecting EM0, but just check which interface is the interface that you want to use. Then I'll enter the first VLAN tag, which will be for my WAN. Once I hit enter, it will then prompt for the interface again so I can set up another VLAN. So I'll enter the interface name again, hit enter, and then I'll enter the VLAN for my LAN interface. Enter again. The prompt will come up a third time. Since I'm only using the two VLANs, hit enter without entering anything and that will complete the VLAN setup. Next, it will ask which interface to use for your WAN. You want to enter the interface name, a full stop, then the VLAN ID that you want to use for your WAN. In this case, I'm using EM0.100. Then I'll hit enter. Then your LAN interface. In this case, EM0.901. Then enter. You don't need to enter anything for optional WAN interface. Just press enter. If you're happy with the interfaces that it displays, type Y and hit enter, and then the system will complete the configuration. This may take a few minutes. Once the system completes configuration, a menu will be displayed. Press 6 and enter to halt the system, which effectively shuts down the computer. Once the computer is shut down, you can unplug it and you're ready to move it. Now it's time to move everything over to its new home. Connect the Starlink router side, the white connection on the PoE injector, to the WAN port you created on the switch. Then connect the router to the router port that you created. Quick side note, the light on the PoE injector won't light up since it's not providing PoE to the switch anymore. Power everything up. Once the PC is booted, connect a computer to the LAN side of your network so you can begin configuring the router. Go to the IP address 192.168.1.1 and use the default credentials, which are admin for the username and pfSense in lowercase for the password. You'll be greeted by the pfSense setup wizard. You'll want to give the device a host name and a domain and also set up the primary and secondary DNS servers. I'm going to use the Cloudflare and Google DNS servers and choosing to disable override DNS. I'm going to use the default time server and I'm going to set the correct time zone. For Starlink, the WAN interface is set to DHCP, no other options need to be set here. Lastly, you'll be asked to set a password for the admin account, so we'll set a strong password here. That's it, the software will restart itself with the new configuration and your router will be up and running. You should now be able to access the internet using your shiny new router. I'm not going to make any changes from the default settings for now, but feel free to explore the features of your shiny new router and even go online and check out the manuals for pfSense to see if there's anything else that you might want to change or tinker around with. I've been running Starlink on my pfSense router for about a week now, and although it isn't scientifically assessed, I have noticed that the dropouts don't seem to be as problematic as they used to be with the standard Starlink router. Latency doesn't seem to be any different either, and the speeds are about the same too. I'm yet to do anything particularly interesting with my new router, but at least I know I have the option to do so. You can still access the traffic graphs and other data using the Starlink app, but it does take a moment for the app to realise that there is a dishy on the network if you're not using the default router. All in all, I'm happy with the performance of the new router, especially compared to the old router. That's it for this episode of Procrasturbate Tech. Go to my channel and check out some of my other videos, including the ones showing up on screen now. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, and if you want to keep up to date with my new content, hit the subscribe button. You can follow Procrasturbate on Facebook and Instagram with the links in the description.